Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the 2021 National Landcare Conference. What a pleasure it is to be able to be standing here and letting you know that we are live and go. The conference is taking place. Thank you all for registering and being a part of the conference. With everything that's been going on, as you know, it's been a difficult and challenging process. But big congratulations to everyone here at Landcare Australia for pushing through and making the conference happen. Do you realise there's somewhere between 2,700 and 3,000 registrations, delegates out there? Each and every one of you, I say a big thank you for joining us over the next 2 days and of course this evening for the awards. It's Landcare Week, and with everything that's gone on, we realised that you couldn't travel to Sydney, so we're bringing the conference to you. One of the great things about the last 18 months has been the development of fantastic interactive technology, and I know that you're there sitting at home but feel comfortable, drop in and out, move around to the different plenaries during the day. Now, all of you out there, I can see you, Landcare volunteers, facilitators, farmers, landowners, educators, academics, traditional owners. And also you may be new to Landcare but want to learn more so that you can be inspired to do something in your community. And we give a really, really big welcome to all of you new land carers. It's part of all of us. It's in our DNA. It goes back a long, long way. Caring for country is what we're about. It's our home. Now, over the next 2 days, the program is absolutely fantastic. There's more than 60 speakers talking about current topics, current projects. There's plenary sessions with guests including Minister Littleproud, Andrew Metcalfe, John Anderson and David Lindenmayer. There will be 4 panel sessions, a wellbeing and mental health one, a landcare farming one, bushfire recovery and resilience, and cultural land management will close the conference on Friday afternoon with Dani Gilbert. Now, concurrently, there's 4 stream session topics, and they are environment and climate change, sustainable agriculture, community partnerships in action, and Landcare impact. And what an impact Landcare has made since that early day back in 1989, over 30 years ago. Bob Hawke said back then it was going to be the decade of Landcare, and here we are 32 years later. And it's a real honour to be able to kick this conference off and move into the 4th decade of Landcare. All speakers, just so you know, will be live and recorded. So if you miss a speaker that you wanted to see, you can watch them later online. You can access their videos, speaker presentations and the posters on the Landcare website or the Education Centre Landcarer. The other advantage of us being online is, for most of you, you can't make it to the event, let alone the dinner that takes place with the awards. But being online, your registration means you'll be able to come to the 2021 Landcare Awards ceremony. Now, tonight we'll bring together over 70 awards finalists from across Australia. There's 9 National Landcare Award categories, including the prestigious Bob Hawke Landcare Award and the General Jeffrey Soil Health Award. Today, of course, would not be possible without our sponsors, and I'd like to give a thank you to the Australian Government's National Landcare Program, Saving Our Species, and to Gallagher. Today, we're online, and it's not just about me coming down the line to you and all of our speakers talking to you. You can connect and chat with each other, and I think that's the wonderful modality that is online. And you can use the Landcare chat function. So if you've got any questions, send them through and talk to each other, respond to people's questions. Because while we can't get together at the morning tea and the lunch and the afternoon tea, we can keep that conversation firing backwards and forwards for the day. So please do that. Now, the other thing I'd like you to do to kick things off from a chat point of view is tap in where you are. And by that I mean what suburb or town, but then put in there as well which country you are on, so that we can see whether you're coming to us from Bundjalung country up in the Northern Rivers, or perhaps you're not far from me here in Sydney on Gadigal country, or perhaps you're on Wiradjuri country or Wurundjeri country. And it's an opportunity for all of us to learn about the name of the place that you are in. So if you put all of those names on there, then we can piece together where you are on the map. So I would like to begin by welcoming Uncle Alan Murray for the Welcome to Country.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Alan Murray. I'm here to do the Welcome to Country. Before I do the Welcome to Country, I want to acknowledge my parents. My mum's from Walgett. She's a Gamaroi woman. Also, I want to acknowledge my father. He's from Kamargunja in Victoria, between Echuca and Shepparton on the great river, the Murray River. But also I want to also acknowledge my father. He's a stolen generation. He was taken away from Kamargunja at the age of 5, and then he was released under the disguise of the Aboriginal Protection Board when he was 18. He came to Sydney, met my mum. I'm a King George's baby, so I'm not giving my age away, but I certainly want to say this, that I've lived in Sydney all my life. One of the things about this place called Sydney is that you get to appreciate the landscape, what it means, the rivers, and also the trees, and also the secret landscapes that also is captured within Sydney. We certainly got the oldest trees living in Sydney or in our boundary as a land council. I also want to acknowledge First Nations people who are part of this conference, but also I want to acknowledge the Gadigal people, their elders past and present. I suppose if you want to share in our legacy, the legacy is this. If you want to walk with us, know this, is that this continent is bound by the land and sea, but it had its people. We've been here for 40,000 years, 60,000 years, 120,000 years. We understand the landscape, we understand the rivers, we understand the star systems, we understand what the animals and what they provide. We've been part of this landscape for millennia. We don't have a word to say one or two. We don't have a word to say thousands or many more, but more importantly, we've been here. And also the result of that, we've got a lot of information about this land. And if you want to protect it the way we've been protecting it, we've gone through the fires, we've gone through the floods, and also we've gone through the past policies. So on behalf of the Metropolitan Local Land Council, welcome to Aboriginal and also the Torres Strait Islander lands, but also, more importantly, welcome to Sydney, and also want to also acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And thank you.
Thank you, Uncle Alan. I was talking to him earlier and he mentioned in there Kamargunja and Yorta Yorta, and I was fortunate enough to become close to Uncle Jimmy Little. Many of you may remember him if you're a little older from his hit song Royal Telephone, but Uncle Jimmy was an absolute icon in our First Nations communities and one of the first First Nations singers, and it's wonderful to hear that connection, that was where he was from, and I immediately thought of him and thought of his legacy, and legacy is really what we're all about here at Landcare, leaving the country in a better place and a better way than it was when we started. So thank you, Uncle Alan. And please continue to put down in the chat where you are in Australia so everyone can see who, where and how we're connecting today and tomorrow. So I'd now like to invite Landcare Australia Chairman Doug Humman to introduce Minister Littleproud. Good morning, Doug.
Costa, and hello everyone. Thank you, Costa, for the warm welcome, including to new land carers. That's so important. And thank you, Uncle Alan Murray, for your welcome to country and the invitation you made to walk with you. And that's a very special invitation. I'm on Gadibanoo country on Victoria's west coast, and I pay my respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and acknowledge your continuing connection to country. It's terrific to be involved again in this national event for Landcare Week. Sad though it is that we're unable to meet face to face. I want to acknowledge all those people in our community who are separated from family, friends and community, and whose daily lives are under pressure from the pandemic. But as the pandemic has shrunk the world that we move in, I've been reminded through my own community that Landcare starts local. We're a grassroots movement of individuals, groups and organisations working together in local community through sustainable land management and conservation activities. And we do share a vision to protect, enhance or restore the natural environment and enable sustainable production across Australia. The National Landcare Conference and Awards is an important event for everyone involved in landcare to share knowledge and experience, create opportunities for connections and development partnerships, and inspire you in your community. The conference speakers and impact and the Landcare Awards finalists showcase the diversity and impact of landcare on the Australian landscape and on its communities that care for the land. Please join us tonight for those awards and for the very special introduction by another First Nations singer-songwriter. Landcare helps to build resilience and cohesion in communities, especially when impacted by bushfire, droughts and floods, and isolation as a result of the pandemic. Landcare activities improve the mental health and well-being of individuals, something we know intuitively and which was confirmed through a well-being survey and report on the landcare community conducted pro bono by KPMG, released last month and launched by Minister Ley. I commend this report to you. Landcare is the only national movement that bridges agriculture and environment, focusing on sustainable and productive agricultural practices, environmental protection and conservation of land and waterways, coastlands and biodiversity. As Costa introduced, landcare is for everyone. From the coast to the country, landcare is made up of individuals, groups and organisations involved in landcare activities. Landcare groups and networks, Indigenous land and sea rangers, farmers and farming system groups, landcare facilitators and coordinators, landowners, youth groups, schools, academics and natural resource management agencies. Volunteers, bush care, coast care, friends of groups, river care, dune care, and many other community-led environmental groups. Across Australia, Landcare Australia's many partnerships support thousands of people involved in landcare to protect local ecosystems that contribute to the sustainability and productivity of our land and water assets. Together with the landcare community, our efforts improve biodiversity and build resilience in Australia's food and farming systems and help create stronger communities. Thank you for the support from our corporate, philanthropic and government partners. The funding and in-kind contributions raised by Landcare Australia support us to develop programs that are practical, deliverable and community-focused. Key partners of Landcare Australia are the National Landcare Network, along with the Landcare peak bodies in each state and territory, with whom we work in joint projects such as the Landcare Farming Program and the Landcare-led Bushfire Recovery grants program. Thank you to the Australian Government for your ongoing bipartisan support of Landcare, a national movement with thousands of people who know their local patch, understand what's required to make an impact, and can mobilise others to be involved. I'd like to acknowledge Andrew Metcalfe, AO, the Secretary of the Department of Agriculture, Water and the Environment. And I'd like to introduce the Honorary David Littleproud, Minister for Agriculture and Northern Australia, to formally open the 2021 National Landcare Conference. Thank you.
Well, thanks for having me at this year's Landcare Conference. And I apologise for not being there in person, but I'm sure you'll be able to get on without me. Can I say thank you for all the work that Landcare has done. Over the years that you've come together, you've actually changed the practices of Australian agriculture and done it at a grassroots level. That's why Landcare is so powerful. It's so powerful right across our communities because you are part of the community and you're connected to it. So our $1.1 billion that we're committing in Landcare is a great investment, not just in the landscape, but our people, because that's what's going to change the practices of continuing to educate one another. Your peers educating each other about how we can do things better, not only to care for country, but actually improve our productivity and our profitability. The federal government's also investing in a biodiversity stewardship package. This is something that I'm so proud of, and we're starting with our pilots, our concept pilots now. I'm really excited about us being the world's first in being able to measure biodiversity. No other country in the world has been able to do this, and I intend to have those pilots up and going before the end of the year, and a trading platform to also be able to support it in a carbon plus biodiversity model. This is exciting times for Australian landscape, and it's all being done by each and every one of you as individuals. We're continuing to also invest in our soils, nearly $200 million in our soil strategy, and we're making sure that we're investing at a grassroots level, getting the soils test done so that we get the tactile data to build on things like carbon sequestration in soils. So to each and every one of you, can I simply say thank you? We've got a great opportunity ahead of us, not just to care for the country, but also incentivise farmers to take up these practices beyond what we ever have done before. So thanks for having me and have a great conference.
Thank you, Doug, and thank you, Minister Littleproud. I noted you mentioned building resilience and building biodiversity, so I thought during the conference, given that I'm here with, well, no one else, well, the tech people are, but I'm just here on my own, I thought I'd add some elements of biodiversity to my props here during the conference. So I'm putting a spider here, and please take note of these additions because there will be a subtle award from me at some point on the final day. So keep an eye out for that. Now, the second thing I just want to mention about using the chat, can those of you in different groups mention in the chat which group you're in, which Landcare group are you in, so that we can also see and hear the names of the different Landcare groups, because I know that there's more than 6,000 of you out there. So drop it in the chat so everyone can get a taste of where your group's from. Now, the Australian Government's National Landcare Program works with many organisations and Landcare groups to support their activities, protect, enhance and restore the natural environment in local communities through sustainable land management and conservation activities. The government's National Landcare Program, with support from Minister Littleproud, have made it possible for us to get here today for this, the 2021 National Landcare Conference and this evening's National Landcare Awards. So I'd now like to welcome Andrew Metcalfe, the Secretary of the Department of Agriculture, Water and the Environment. Andrew, great to see you. Welcome to the conference.
Well, thank you so much, Costa, and a very warm welcome to everyone right around Australia. It's fantastic that we're able to get together, even virtually, and certainly we're all thinking of people in Sydney and Brisbane who are locked down, and for those of us who can't travel. But I'm just delighted that we can get together for this conference, and in advance, my congratulations to the winners this evening. Colleagues, I'm meeting with you here today from Canberra, and I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting on. For me here in Canberra, And in the language of the Ngunnawal people, can I say, Dara Nuna, Dara Ngunnawal, Yangu, Nalamanyin, Dunamanyin, Ngunnawal Wari, Dawa Wari, Dindi, Wangara Lin Jin Nin, which means this is Ngunnawal country. Today we are meeting together on Ngunnawal country. We acknowledge and pay respects to their elders. And like other speakers before me, can I extend that recognition to the traditional custodians of all the lands on which people are gathered today, and to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples attending this day's event. Indigenous land carers and communities right around Australia, and the expertise and the knowledge that they bring are invaluable to the land care movement. Colleagues, firstly, I'd like to thank the Minister for welcoming everyone, and for Landcare Australia and National Landcare Network for the opportunity to formally speak at the conference today. For those of you who don't know me, and sadly I haven't been able to get around the country and meet people in the way that I would have because of the restrictions we've had over the last year or so, I'm the Secretary, or the sort of the most senior Chief Executive Public Servant in the Department of Agriculture, Water and the Environment. I was born and raised in Toowoomba in Queensland, and had many family associations out on the Darling Downs and further west out towards Charleville as well. Indeed, my grandfather used to work as a station manager for Sydney Kidman, and at one stage in a colourful life was a participant in Sculthorpe's riding circus, which some of you may have heard about, operating in Western Queensland in the 1890s. As Secretary of the Department, we have an extraordinary connection with Landcare. We truly do bring together agriculture, water and environment policy and programs at the Commonwealth Government level. Many of the key positions and people that you know, the Threatened Species Commissioner, the Commonwealth Environmental Water Holder, the Director of Commonwealth National Parks are all part of my department. And I have the honour also, as well as being Secretary, of being Australia's Director of Biosecurity, and responsible for biosecurity associated with animal and plant issues at a Commonwealth Government level. But today we're here to celebrate Landcare, and it gives me great pleasure to officially launch the conference. It's great that this event has proceeded virtually, as it ensures we can continue to talk about, share experiences and celebrate this important movement. It's a chance to talk, to listen and learn about Landcare, and to acknowledge some inspiring people through the awards tonight. Landcare, of course, is a shared vision to protect, enhance and restore Australia's natural environments through sustainable land management and conservation activities. Everyone is responsible, all of us are responsible, individuals, community groups, organisations and corporations, and the state and federal and territory governments. We're all in this together. It's all about the future of this wonderful country of ours. Landcare supports 5,000 groups around Australia and over 100,000 volunteers, all caring for our country. And there's no doubt thousands more people are involved in supporting activities as well. Colleagues, I now live in the Sutton district, which some of you would know is just outside Canberra to the north. I've got a rural property out there, and I see firsthand through my friends and my neighbours in the area the work that Sutton Landcare does, the great work it does to improve the natural environment in our region. The philosophy of Sutton Landcare, which I'm sure is the same as many other landcare groups, is to ensure that members are fully informed on the principles of sustainable environmental management and how to implement them. And armed with the right knowledge, private landowners like my wife and I can ensure that we manage our properties in accord with sound environmental practices. The Australian government recognises the essential role of natural resource management in growing the agricultural sector, protecting our environment and building regional communities, both now and for generations to come. This is demonstrated through the 30 years of support for Landcare through the National Landcare Program and its predecessors, dating back to the Hawke government, as well as a range of other contemporary measures such as the Ag 2030 program, the Future Drought Fund, the National Soil Strategy, the Agriculture Stewardship Package that the Minister just mentioned, the Carbon and Diversity Pilot, and many other initiatives. Recent survey results commissioned by my department and undertaken by ABARES has found that many good natural resource management practices are now well accepted and adopted by Australian farmers, and that the Landcare ethos of stewardship has created real and lasting change in the way that we farm and the way that we manage our natural resources and environment. But we can't ever stop. We can't rest on our laurels. The government's Ag 2030 plan has an ambition of supporting the industry's $100 billion target by 2030. To achieve this, we need to have another wave of innovation reminiscent of the Green Revolution in agriculture in the 50s and 60s. This time around, productivity gains must be achieved against the backdrop of climate change and matched with a genuine commitment to sustainable use of resources and conservation of biodiversity. There's an increasing expectation that our agricultural producers will be able to demonstrate their environmental credentials. There's a challenge to be both carbon and biodiversity neutral or indeed positive. There's an opportunity to be positive so that surplus credits can be sold to other sectors, creating a market and providing an alternate source of income for land managers, as the Minister mentioned just now. In addition, projects under the National Landcare Program are connecting efforts for the recovery of species identified through the Threatened Species Strategy by conserving and restoring habitat and through control and eradication of invasive species. And I'd particularly like to acknowledge the work of Landcare Australia and the National Landcare Network, who are jointly managing $14 million in Australian government funding for bushfire recovery for wildlife habitat. And another component of National Landcare Program is the Regional Agriculture Landcare Facilities, known as the RALFs. I know many of you are online today, and you'll hear from some of our RALFs throughout the conference. Colleagues, I'd also like to touch on how beneficial the unification of the previous Department of Agriculture has been with functions from the previous Department of Environment and Energy. As we all know, agriculture and environmental outcomes often overlap, as they should. Sustainable agriculture can benefit our environment, and environmental preservation can assist our agricultural industry. There's a symbiosis there that my department is working very hard to try and maximise and optimise. It's amazing and inspiring to see the collaboration and cooperation across my department as we work together towards the same goal of partnering and regulating to enhance Australia's agriculture, unique environment and heritage, and our water resources. I believe that all land carers should be really proud of the impact that you are having in protecting the natural resources in your communities, particularly during these testing times. And of course, as we've said earlier, we look forward to celebrating some of that great effort and resilience at the Landcare Awards tonight. Now, as we know, the Landcare movement continues to grow. The scope and participation levels of the conference showed just how important Landcare movement is for so many people. It's truly this community spirit that makes Landcare so uniquely special. It's one thing to encourage people to care for the environment, but it's something entirely different to see your neighbours, your community and your friends working together to care for and tend for the land that sustains them. This is truly what sustainability means, and nothing exemplifies the spirit more than the continued grassroots culture of the Landcare movement. But I think that perhaps the greatest achievement of Landcare is how much it's brought our communities together. In an age of ever increasing isolation due to social distancing and as a byproduct in an ironic way of social media, it's truly wonderful to see communities come together and connect while caring for our land. It's creating meaningful, long-term relationships, not surprisingly, and it's been linked to well-being as indicated and outlined in the recent KPMG Landcare Wellbeing Report that Doug referred to earlier. That report indicates that for the Landcare movement, which exceeds 140,000 people, Landcarers avoid $57 million in healthcare costs due to a boost in mental and physical well-being. It's great for us, it's great for our country. I'd like to finish this morning by reflecting just again on how wonderful I think Landcare is as a great community, a great Australian movement. It's a shared responsibility that so many of us are involved in and passionate about, and one that brings us together right around this great country. I'd like to again congratulate Landcare Australia and the National Landcare Network for holding this conference, for persisting to ensure that we do come together and pivoting in doing that into a virtual event with the uncertainties that the pandemic brings. As I said at the outset, for those of you in lockdown, we're all thinking of you. You all have our support. We're all grateful for what you're doing to stop the spread of the virus, and we all hope that you are well and that your families and your work friends are all safe as well. So everyone, it's been great to be with you today. I look forward to being part of the conference, and I'm really looking forward to our next speaker, the former Deputy Prime Minister, John Anderson, who I've worked with for many years, who truly is a great Australian. I'm really delighted that he can be with us today. But in the meantime, Costa, I'll hand back to you.
Thank you, Andrew. Fantastic words. And I notice in the background there, you've got some very important banners that are everyone's business. Biosecurity is everyone's business. And I think one thing that I want to put out to everyone, if you have any questions on any aspects of Landcare, put them up in the chat, and don't be overwhelmed or overawed. Biosecurity, for example, sounds a bit, wow, where does that fit in? It's all of our opportunity to contribute through observing, noticing changes in our landscapes and being able to report that. So thanks for putting those banners up there in the background, Andrew, because it just brings attention to the importance that biosecurity is something that we can all participate in every single day. Some major problems have been identified by people just reporting something that looks out of place. Just while we were listening to Andrew, I want to mention thanks for jumping on the chat. Zakir is listening and contributing all the way from Pakistan. Francis from the Department of Agriculture in South Africa. We've got Holbrook Landcare. Chris and the team at Wurrigi Landcare. We visited Wurrigi Primary School with Gardening Australia a few years ago, and they're doing amazing work. Holbrook Landcare, Otways Landcare on Gulidjan and Garubanud country down in the Otways. We've got Intrepid Landcare joining us. Megan, thank you, from Marion on the Mid-Lachlan and the Mid-Lachlan Landcare. We've got the Office of the National Soils Advocate. Jerry from the Gums Landcare in South Australia, and on Warramai and Burrupi country in the mid-north coast of New South Wales. A big welcome to you all, and thanks for joining us. It's just fantastic to scroll down the list of comments and the contributions that you're making to the conference already. Andrew, thank you once again, and I'd now like to follow on from Andrew and his little introduction and introduce our next speaker, the Honourable John Anderson. John is a sixth-generation farmer and grazier from northwestern New South Wales. He spent 19 years from 1989 in the Australian Parliament. Whew, John, you're still standing. It's good to see. I think that's a really big contribution to our community. 19 years in Parliament. This included 6 years as leader of the National Party and Deputy Prime Minister as a member of the reformist government led by John Howard. John Anderson, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here to address the 2021 National Landcare Conference. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you very much indeed. And I'm sorry it's in this disemboweled form. And I'm probably at a stage in life where I find it a bit hard to work. So I hope you can hear me. I hope others can hear me.
All good.
One beauty of it is that if I put you to sleep or you get totally bored and you've got to go off and get a coffee or disappear or something, I won't know about it. So I won't be offended. But look, it's terrific to be with you. As you mentioned, I'm a sixth-generation farmer in northwest New South Wales. It's a pleasure to be able to talk to all of you. I saw Andrew Metcalf a moment ago. Andrew, to you and to, how do I put this in this disemboweled form? Distinguished guests all. It's a great honour. I've always had a great interest in practical farming, but also in feeding people. And as I just reflect, to put it into some perspective, we're all dependent on water, we're all dependent upon soils, we all need them to be operated properly. It's a staggering thing to me just to remember that we now have a situation where for the last 10 years, the world's farmers have produced enough food every year to feed 10 billion people, well in excess of global population. The fact that anybody goes hungry raises all sorts of political, moral and infrastructure questions, not least of all the amount of food that we waste in the West. But Australian farmers, of course, perhaps the most efficient in the world, operating in some of the toughest conditions in the world. The NFF, I think, says that one Australian farmer feeds 600 others. But there are many, many people, in fact, all Australians have an interest in land and soil and water, as I've just indicated. And there are vast numbers of people involved in land care across the nation. So it's not just farmers we're talking about at all when we come to talk about land care, even though in the early days it was largely farmer oriented. From a personal point of view, as I look back over it, I'm amazed at how emotionally attached I have been and my neighbours have been to their land and to looking after it and to wanting to ensure that they correct bad practices, because many of the European farming practices, land management practices we imported have not been relevant for Australia. I remember as a little boy of about 3, seeing our neighbours operate an enormous, by the standards of those days, would have been about 1960, bulldozers putting in contour banks, big banks along the contours, which had a gentle slope or went with the land to run water off gently so that when the summer storms hit, you didn't get massive sheet erosion or gully erosion. And that was probably my first awareness of the need to nurture soil, to look after the soil that we expect to nurture us. And the New South Wales Soil Conservation Service, of course, became a very respected body indeed, right across New South Wales, and its equivalents in other states, very important in those earlier days. One of the things about farming is that farmers share information. Neighbours talk to one another about what's working, not just in terms of production capacity, but also in terms of how they're looking after their land. And that was, I think, one of the things that helped land care in the early days get off the ground. There was already a culture of sharing information, of seeking to work in a cooperative way. And so over time, I saw how we learned how to hold our soils together better. From the 1980s on, we started reducing burn-offs of stubble. We started to incorporate stubble into the ground. We started to move towards what was becoming known more and more as conservation farming. In the early days, there were all sorts of problems getting the right sort of machinery to handle big stubble loads, nitrogen tie-up, and so forth. But all of those things were overcome. Ingenuity reigns in the farm sector, largely backed up and made possible by the very innovative research and development cooperative models that we have in this country for taking forward knowledge. And we've made tremendous progress in terms of stabilising our soils where I live, and I think that's the case in many parts of Australia. We've stopped pulverising our soils with ploughs, we use direct seeding, all of those sorts of things. We now move on to new techniques, trying to make certain that we've always got ground cover on our pasture land, and indeed, so far as possible, on our farming land. The game keeps changing. We keep learning more. But land care itself was to provide a major impetus in terms of accelerating, I think, the whole push across Australia to do better by our land. It started in Victoria. It was an initiative of Joan Kirner, the one-time Minister for Conservation. She was later Premier, of course, and Heather Mitchell, then President of the Victorian Farmers Federation. With the generous support of community members, farmers and Victorian departmental officials, Heather Mitchell and Joan Kerner were able to launch Landcare in a small town in central Victoria right back in 1986. Now, in January 1988, Australia's first official Dune Care groups formed on the New South Wales mid-north coast at Hat Head, at Diamond Beach, at Scott's Head, and Diggers Beach. In fact, there's a little plaque with my name on just near Diggers Beach. One of the things that they did there in looking after dunes, I was able to provide some money for, and they kindly asked me long to open it. But the point there being, of course, that it had gone beyond people just looking after and being focused on the sort of things that I might have been interested in on my own farm in northwest New South Wales. In 1989, Rick Farley of the National Farmers Federation and Philip Toyne of the Australian Conservation Foundation succeeded in lobbying the Hawke government to commit to supporting the emerging movement, and thus Landcare Australia, as we've known it ever since, was born. I was actually very newly minted, Costa, in the Parliament at the time in 1989. Bob Hawke gave a speech to an audience of both farmers and conservationists announcing the Decade of Landcare plan and committing 320 million, quite a bit of money in those days. These days, you know, we talk $1 billion here and $1 billion there, and before you know it, you're talking real money. But in those days, 320 really was real money. And that was to fund the initial National Landcare program. And it's worth quoting this. He said, "The degradation of our environment is not simply a local problem, nor a problem for one state or another, nor for the Commonwealth alone. Rather, the damage being done to our environment is a problem for all of us, and not just for governments, but each of us individually and together. The solutions are to be found through cooperation at all levels and by community groups who care for the land." And of course, he was right. The cooperation that Bob Hawke talked about at the launch of Landcare is and remains the key to looking after our land well. Leadership from the government is essential if we're going to have good progress on a broad scale, at the same time as grassroots actions from farmers, conservationists and locals wanting to make a difference is also necessary to identify solutions to local problems and get boots on the ground. And I'll say a bit more about that at the moment, because I'm really quite excited about the leadership that the current Minister, David Littleproud, and his department, represented, I know today, by Andrew Metcalfe, are taking in the name of the National Soil Strategy. So 30 years on from the Landcare launch, degraded environments are, if you like, less common, but nonetheless still presenting us with a real challenge for Australia. And in many other parts of the world, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. So while we acknowledge the progress we've been made, for example, in 2004, about 10% of Australia's land was, if you like, under the umbrella of Landcare groupings and Landcare action. It's now closer to 20%. And I would think many, many people who are not formal groups of Landcare have learned a great deal and are applying, frankly, much better management techniques than they were in days gone by. We've seen reintroduction programs. They successfully halted the decline of some of Australia's most endangered mammals, including the numbat, the greater bilby, and the bridled nail-tail wallaby. A lot of this was accelerated by something that I was very proud of, initially known as Farm Biz in the early 2000s, or actually was introduced as part of Agriculture Advancing Australia in 1998. And it saw accredited farm management and conservation programs for farmers subsidised to encourage farmers to take them up. And it was extraordinarily successful, vast numbers of farmers. One of the most best known courses, Grazing for Profit, I think something like 7,000 or 8,000 farmers have undertaken it. Now that's probably 7 or 8% of Australia's farm business units. It's been very successful. 95% of participants have incorporated skills and knowledge into their business and natural resource management practices. So farmers are always keen to learn, and if they get a bit of help with professional development, they'll take to it with alacrity. And over the last 20 years, of course, and this is a really important point to make, better conservation practices usually go hand in hand with better productivity and better profitability, we've seen the value of agricultural, fisheries and forestry production in Australia increase by a very considerable amount in real terms. It's gone up, not down, and I think that's very encouraging. So Landcare has played a central role to broader progress. It was the second largest beneficiary of a very large contribution by the government in about 1996-7 of the $1 billion Natural Heritage Trust Fund that was set aside from the sale of Telstra. It continues to attract funding and in-kind support from governments for government, corporate and philanthropic endeavours. What started as cooperation between neighbouring farms to address land and water has grown into a true nationwide movement, addressing a wide range of environmental issues within each catchment area. Landcare Australia has had great success in working collaboratively with federal, state and local governments and agencies, Landcare peak bodies, corporate and philanthropic partners, sponsors, community groups and individuals. The local nature of Landcare groups allows specific local problems to be addressed by Australians cooperatively from the coasts to the country, from the city to the outback. It's fostered recognition for and trust in the Landcare brand amongst everyday Australians. That branding is, I think, very valuable. There are consistently, it's revealed positive attitudes towards local projects, and around 80% of Australians recognise the famous Caring Hands logo. It's true that Landcare looks different throughout Australia and in different parts of Australia, but its core purpose remains the same: empowering individuals and their communities to sustainably manage and build resilience in our natural and agricultural landscapes, ecosystems and communities. Currently, no less than 142,000 Australians and 6,000 groups all over the country, including Landcare Landcare groups, networks, facilitators and coordinators, farmers and farming systems groups, landowners, traditional owners, friends of groups, bush care, coast care, dune care, river care groups, junior land care and youth groups and other community groups are involved. Interestingly to me, I found this very fascinating. Being part of a Landcare group has been proven by a recent KPMG study to deliver real benefits for people personally. 93% of land carers feel more connected to the natural environment. 90% feel more connected to other people since starting their work with Landcare. Landcare helped give information and guidance to local individuals and communities who bore the brunt of the 2019-20 bushfire season and other natural disasters. 49% of land carers, 58% of those employed casually or part-time, reported their overall mental health had moderately or significantly improved since joining Landcare. And even for those who spent less than 4 hours per month involved in Landcare, 43% reported improvements. Getting on for 50% of land carers report improved mental resilience and ability to deal with challenges in general as a result of working with Landcare. Landcare particularly improves the mental well-being of the young, the unemployed, the mentally ill, and those facing natural disasters new to their area or dealing with loneliness. I've seen this firsthand, even with the Working for the Dole scheme, when young people went out, Green Corps in particular, young people giving up 6 months or so, particularly if they were unemployed, to participate in Green Corps, which was an initiative, I think, of Tony Abbott's when we were in government. Seeing the young people at the end of it so motivated and so engaged in what they're doing, and in some cases their parents telling me with unbelievable relief and joy and appreciation what a difference it had been made for their kids. They have to get up out of bed and go and clean up that riverbank or clean up the rubbish somewhere or plant trees. Very, very valuable indeed. And indeed, the benefits for younger demographics are particularly notable in the stats. 61% of 30 to 34-year-olds reporting improved mental well-being compared with 35% for older people. So a conservative estimate's been struck in relation to the economic benefits stemming from improved mental and physical health and improvements to resilience and recovery from natural disasters. It's been put at $1,347 per person per year, totaling $191 million every year across Australia. And one thing that does occur to me is that many farmers particularly worry, and people who are not farmers often pull me up in the streets and say they're worried about the amount of land in Australia that's now not owned by Australians. I make a couple of points about that. Ever since the AA Company in the 1830s bought land, it was a British company near Tea Gardens on the Central Coast in New South Wales, the amount of land that's been owned by offshore investors in Australia has varied between about 8 and 10%. It has struck a high now at about 14%, as I understand it. Very important, I might point out of that we try and make sure that the owners of that land are aware that there is a deep expectation. There should be a deep expectation, and they should be aware of that deep expectation that they too will nurture that land and not think of it as something, it's usually a capital gains play, I suspect, for these offshore companies, that they can just walk away from in terms of looking to participate and join with their neighbours and with the Australian community in ensuring that that land is in the best possible form for future generations. So what does Landcare do now? Well, knowing the great value it brings to the Australian environment and people, the government has continued its support for Landcare, and I certainly welcome that. An important part of the government's investment is the second phase of the National Landcare Program, $136 million in the Smart Farms program beginning a couple of years ago. It'll run for several more years. Smart Farms provides funds for projects that address a range of sustainable agricultural and natural resource management issues, including soil health, pest and weed management, Indigenous involvement, climate and market risk, and use of new technologies and extension pathways to improve farming practices and therefore productivity. It's vital that farmers are given a helping hand to adopt best practices so that they can not only maximise profits, but also maximise the enduring value of their land for future generations. Regional land partnerships investing over $450 million over 5 years from 2018 to 2023 are designed to help farmers improve soil, biodiversity and vegetation, as well as threatened species and ecosystem conservation and the protection of wetlands and World Heritage Sites. The National Soil Strategy, which I touched on earlier, gives 20-year planning approaches for improving soil health, empowering soil innovation and stewardship, and strengthening soil knowledge and capability. It's well known that our soils in Australia are ancient. Many are thin. Many are, at one level, easily damaged, although a lot of them have proved to be surprisingly resilient and dynamic in terms of their ability to recover with the right care. It's important to note that. Landcare has helped fund now thousands of grant projects across Australia, and I think there's been an enormous flow on as people have learned how to do things, as they've seen ways of approaching sustainability. It's been picked up in a way that's probably hard to identify through studies of actual Landcare projects. But some recent examples include protecting newly planted native seedlings from deer in East Gippsland revegetation areas, fencing off a creek on a farm in Waterloo, Western Australia to stabilise banks and prevent erosion, and installing a water pump for cattle. That, of course, in where I come from, has been something that farmers have been actively doing as to make the point again, whether they're part of a Landcare group or not, with their riparian zones now for some time, and seeking to reticulate water rather than allow stock to overgraze creek and river banks and gully banks. Litter collection to improve waterways, and weeding and planting of native species to reduce dune erosion in Dee Why in the northern suburbs of Sydney and New South Wales. Weeding and planting native species, constructing a walking path and installing signage that includes the Indigenous Yorta Yorta language in Tallygaroopna Station Park in Victoria. I hope I pronounced that properly. The enormous progress made by Landcare in Australia has also inspired many other countries, and I think this is where our leadership And I think I can say that without being immodest, because I think in so many areas of understanding soils and farming, because of our difficult environment, because of our commitment to research, because perhaps we've had to learn new ways of doing things, we are global leaders. I find it inspiring that Landcare has inspired many other countries to launch their own Landcare programs. I think first cab off the rank was actually South Africa. I remember them adapting a version of our logo very, very early on, but they've been joined now by Germany, Iceland, New Zealand, the Philippines, and there's a growing awareness and take-up of the concept in the United States, in Kenya and Uganda, Tanzania, Sri Lanka, Indonesia. Interest is being shown in Rwanda, in Ethiopia, in Nigeria, Namibia, India, Canada, and the Pacific Islands. So that's encouraging. Now, to come to the importance of soil carbon, Australia has a long history of agricultural innovation, as I've said, world first environmental initiatives. A prominent example is the Carbon Farming Initiative, a vital part of the National Soil Strategy. It gives farmers carbon credits for the carbon they sequester in their soils through improved farming practices. Perhaps in simple terms, it's important to remember that farmers and the business of feeding people certainly emits carbon, CO2. No doubt about that. It's released into the air, and the activities of farming, perhaps 30% of global emissions are driven by or created by the business of feeding people from what might be called paddock to plate. If you include especially the last food mile, when here in this country we make 5.7 trips on average, I'm told, to Woolworths or the grocery shop or wherever, to pick up foodstuffs and what have you, a week, 5.7 trips a week. Forgot that bag of sugar, or I need some more coffee beans, or whatever it happens to be, quite apart from the major shops. So, emissions are a major part, or feeding people is a major contributor to the question of emissions. But it's also important to remember that carbon is a building block of life, and farmers use carbon. They actually recycle it. Land properly managed absorbs carbon. It's then released and is part of the production process, feeding people, what have you. And if you stop and think about it, if during that recycling process we can capture just a little more, it could be potentially very, very exciting indeed in a whole range of ways. One of them that's often overlooked is that many soils around the world are now being, I won't say exhausted, some are, but certainly well used. And the density of a lot of our foodstuffs around the world has been suffering as a result. More carbon in the soil can make an astonishing difference. And indeed, it's fascinating to me to know that a unit of carbon stored will allow for an increase of 6 times its weight volume, as I understand it, that's very crudely put, in water absorption, and allow for better releasing of nitrogen for plants to use. So putting carbon back into the soil helps the environment, it helps restore soil health, it helps rehydrate the landscape, it boosts diversity of flora and fauna, and it helps us with the question of emissions. Former Chief Scientist Robin Batterham believes that with the right approaches, we could meet and even exceed our Paris obligations alone just by putting carbon back into our soils, by pulling CO2 out of the atmosphere, storing it in our soils, including deep down. Now, many of you will have a lot of views on this, and the scientists themselves have some heated perspectives on it, but I remain optimistic as a farmer that a great deal more can be done, and that the benefits are widespread. It'll boost sustainable agricultural productivity and economic growth in rural areas. It'll give farmers a marketing edge. Imagine if they really can genuinely say that something is emissions neutral in its production by the time you get to eat it, and that it's also better for you. It's denser, higher quality, more nutrient-rich food. Farming methods that emphasise rich crop diversity and forego some of the older practices, some people would argue perhaps about the role of synthetic inputs, have the potential to increase productivity considerably and to help maintain crop and pasture yields even during periods of drought. And it's worth remembering that Bob Hawke spoke about the importance of addressing soil at the Landcare launch. He said, none of Australia's environmental problems is more serious than the soil degradation. Nearly 2/3 of our continent's arable land, the most fundamental ingredient both of our natural environment and of our agricultural prosperity, is our soil. Much work has already been done to reverse this degradation, and Landcare has played a key role, particularly through this collaborative approach that we've talked about. Interestingly to me, as a conservation farmer, I'm told that we lead the world now in the conversion to conservation crop production. The uptake by Australian farmers is now the highest in the world. And on the other hand, our graziers are rapidly developing techniques that store soil carbon. On a global scale, a 15% increase in the world's terrestrial carbon stock. I know that's a high number, but it just gives you an idea of what might be possible. Even if we don't achieve the full 15%, any move towards it will make an incredible difference. But 15% would remove the equivalent of all of the carbon in the atmosphere emitted from fossil fuels since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And the potential worldwide benefits of incorporating improved agricultural, environmental and land management practices reaffirm the importance of Australia continuing to lead the way in research and development and implementation. The key is cooperation based on sound research. And as a by note, the one thing we do need as farmers is more accessible, more user-friendly carbon measurement, soil carbon measurement techniques, carbon in, carbon out, carbon balance. Let me come to, as I draw to the end of my remarks today, what I might call climate alarmism, COVID and our youth. Now, don't hear me saying that I don't take climate change seriously. I do. I should note that I think that we as Australians face many, many, many challenges, and that we need to remember that we've got to walk and chew gum at the same time. The world is fragmenting in dangerous ways, I think economically, politically, and even militarily. And a breakdown in what might be called the liberal global order is a real possibility, and that may be disastrous for global and cooperation on climate change. And I take that very seriously indeed. But I do want to say this. I am worried that concerns around climate can degenerate into alarmism and even catastrophization by activists, sometimes with broader agendas. It's important that we improve our communication of important data in the media, in the discussion around climate change. We often hear about tipping points. We've been hearing about them for a long time, and thresholds beyond which there is no return. The most common being a 1.5 degree temperature rise since pre-industrial times. But recent research, this is important, challenges the idea of thresholds, in inverted commas, in climate science. Out of 36 recent meta-analyses, not one revealed any sign of a transition to a much worse ecological state once a particular threshold was reached. We need to remember, and Landcare people know this, that natural systems are highly dynamic. They're prone to change according to the current science. Any attempt to define a climate tipping point from which there is no recovery is entirely arbitrary. Instead, current data suggests that the impact of human-induced climate changes in environmental factors are better characterised by gradual shifts in response magnitudes. And yet much of the message coming from us, our mainstream media, dramatically overstates what the current science is telling us. This is important. It's no wonder that 80% of young Australians experience climate anxiety, according to a 2019 study by the Australian Psychological Society. And again, I emphasise, I'm not saying that they should not be concerned. What I am saying is that catastrophisation and alarmism tends to lead to despair and anxiety rather than a positive attitude of saying we have challenges, we need to tackle them, we've got to find a way through them. We must move beyond this existential catastrophizing if we're to have any hope of dealing effectively with the challenges that do face us. After all, there are only so many doomsday prophecies that anxious people can listen to before anxiety gives way to hardened cynicism. And instead of feeding into the hysterical reporting on climate change, we must focus on spreading a message of hope that through the challenges, although the challenges before us appear immense, there's much we can do to overcome them, and much progress has been already made. Such a message is not naive optimism, it is the truth. The drop-off in the per head emissions levels of many people in the Western world today has been quite remarkable. And it's a pointer to what can be achieved and is being achieved. Now, instead of increasing young people's anxieties, this will equip them with a genuine sense of what they can do to make a difference. That's the Landcare model. And the pandemic, intermittent lockdowns and uncertainty of the times in which we live, they've only added to the mental health problems and the feelings of powerlessness that too many of our young people experience. The Junior Landcare program in early learning childhood centres, primary schools and secondary schools helps give children the opportunity to enjoy the benefits of working with their community to improve their local environment from a young age, helps to empower the next generation to face the challenges ahead. That's what I'm driving at. If we can encourage more young people to get involved in Landcare once lockdowns end, not only will our ecosystems be more resilient in the face of future droughts, floods and fires, but the mental health and resilience and sense of community amongst our youth will also improve. So in conclusion, Australians can be genuinely proud of the value that Landcare has brought, both to our people and our land. Recognising how far we've come and the strategies and hard work that have brought about so much good for our country allows us to identify what works and what doesn't. And this means that we can tackle the challenges that remain with us today by working together towards the vision that has always been at the heart of Landcare, all Australians actively caring for the land and our environment and for the water that sustains us and indeed all life on this remarkable planet. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Being in this situation, there's no audience sound, there's no input, there's no claps, there's no audio. But yeah, you certainly covered a big area in that topic, and I was looking at some of the comments coming through, and from the very essence of Landcare, land, soil and water, and the groups that are involved in this, from Indigenous rangers looking after oceans, landscapes, lakes, rivers, creeks, waterways. There were so many areas that you tapped into in terms of the history of Landcare, going back to soil conservation and contour banks, and then we look through then into the work of Percy Yeomans and Keyline, and you touched on Hat Head and the Dune Care, and then the launch of Landcare in 32 years ago. Simon made a comment, 80% of Australia recognises that logo, that Landcare logo, and it is about a message of hope. It is, as you said, in these challenging times, a question of power and powerlessness, and that context of where do we centre the power in people so that they can not just see hope but take action and turn their understanding and the information, because there is so much information out there. People are overwhelmed with information, but you brought it back about that cooperation based on sound research, and data is key. The more data we have, the more we can make leveraged decisions to not only make change but bring people in. And that area of what you've been involved in over such a long period of time, we have a question here that says farming organisations have been seeking recognition for good land management for a long time. You've seen this on both sides of the fence as a farmer and in the political realm. Various programs have been proposed and piloted, and you've seen these. What do you think is required to move from these pilot phases to large-scale reward across the farming sector moving forward?
Look, two comments off the top of my head. I touched on Farm Biz. There was a wonderful lady in the then Department of Primary Industries and Energy, Vanessa Tripp, and she and I designed it together. The number of farmers who have shown a great willingness to learn, particularly including conservation, but I'd say the way in which good farming practices can not just improve sustainability, but also profitability and ensure that you can lock it in for the future, is quite remarkable. So I am all for those sorts of programs which make it easy for farmers to access and attend even 4, 5, 6 day long training programs. And, because they're custodians of their land, it seems right that the taxpayers more generally are prepared to help with the cost of them. There's a community-wide benefit. Research and development remains incredibly important. There are differences between agricultural sectors in the take-up of good research, which is interesting. So, for example, cotton in my day was all the cotton growers were the quickest of all to take up new technologies, most interested and the quickest to respond. I think that's important. Landcare, of course, does recognise, and I think that's important. It's a big thing, to win recognition annually as part of Landcare for what you've been doing. That's a third point that I would make. Maybe that should be pumped up even more beyond rural communities, and maybe governments could think about highlighting in ways that you get the message over in this days of country-city divide, where so few people have any real understanding of what happens on our land, on the land, to sort of up the visual side of and information side, learning side of awards for people who have done really innovative things. And the other point that I would make, I touched on it, I am optimistic. I remain optimistic that regardless of how they do it, if farmers have a quick and ready way that's reliable and trusted and meets the highest standards, which happen to be Australians, of certification for storing more carbon, then if they can sell those carbon units either to the Australian funds or offshore, that could be a real driver. And there are a lot of farmers who are recording higher levels of carbon. As I said, there are still some scientists who don't think it'll be sustainable, or that you'll reach peak saturation quite quickly, or that it'll be released in a bad time. I know that. But if you look at Wilmot Farms, a very interesting exercise at Ebor in the New England, Microsoft from America paid $500,000 for 40,000 tonnes of carbon storage. Interestingly, America, because Microsoft is an American company, gets the emissions credits, not Australia. Nonetheless, it is pulling carbon or CO2 out of the air and storing it as carbon, and Microsoft had confidence that they'd be able to sustain that. That I think can see, we're close, but we're not quite there. There's a lot of talk about it, a lot of activity. It's still too hard and expensive and clumsy to get that quick measurement. People say $3 a hectare would be the holy grail. At the moment, it's more like 17, and it's clumsy and it's difficult, and you've got to change your land management practices. I'm agnostic on what you do to store more carbon. I think if a farmer can find an innovative way to store more carbon, or any land manager, I mean, much of the land that's run by Aboriginal people, they understood some of the things. For example, cool burns versus hot burns might be a very good way to increase carbon storage in the soil, as I understand it, because it promotes rapid, quick regrowth of grasses and what have you, and pasture. I am convinced, or still very optimistic, are the words I'll use, that there's a real opportunity here. and that land managers and farmers will be seen to be making a massive contribution to our emissions objectives, that they will benefit financially, and that we will get better foodstuffs as an added bonus, potentially a massive win-win-win.
What do you think's had the most influence or impact on supporting farmers to make changes? Because you talk about that city-country divide and the age of farmers increasing and people's perception. But what have you seen, from a farming and a policymaker point of view, to be that influencer for change? How do we bring people along?
Well, I actually think something unique about farmers, that you don't see the business sector sharing their deepest, most profound commercial secrets with their competitors, but you do amongst farmers. Farmers are very collaborative in sharing information. Nothing they like more than yarning over the local bushfire brigade annual general meeting about something they've learnt with their conservation farming, or something that they've observed, or something that's re-emerged, or whatever. I know we changed our grazing practices here, and over the last 15 years, a grass called giant oaten grass started to reappear, and one of our neighbours said, "I have not seen that on these slopes since before the Second World War." That talking, that cooperation, reflecting a deep commitment to land on the part of most, not all, I'm not going to say that. There are still some people, in my view, that are still too tough on their land. But that deep commitment to their land, that commitment to sharing, not seeing their neighbours as competitors, but rather people to cooperate with. I think that baseline set of attitudes is very important. And Landcare tapped into it and built on it and accelerated it. It had allowed something that was sort of natural, I think, to farmers to really take off. But I've touched on the other thing. I do think research and development's very important. We do it very well here. I belong to one side of politics. It was the other side of politics that came up with our research and development models, dollar for dollar funding. So I can give great political credit to, I think it might have been John Kerrin, but they have worked a treat, and that's helped keep us, Australian farming, at the cutting edge of research globally. We have to be good, because it's never been an easy country to farm in.
I think
there are a couple of the factors.
Yeah, I know that one of our nominees for the Bob Hawke Award has started a Green Triangle, which is effectively a conversation group that gets together monthly and moves around from farm to farm, sharing these ideas and building on the data and the innovations that they're making in terms of diversifying their operation and managing their business plans around biomass and the ebb and flow, not placing a business plan on the landscape, placing the landscape or managing the landscape according to managing the business plan to the landscape.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of that happening, and actually it's not new. I remember going to Birchip in Victoria a couple of times, actually, and I've forgotten what they called their group now. There's probably somebody listening in who can text in and tell you what they call themselves now, but that's exactly what they were doing, and it was making a huge difference, and you could see the sort of the spring in their step, even in a tough time when I went to visit, their optimism about what they were doing. And my son and daughter-in-law, who run our farm now, I'm the truck driver at wheat tie. I know I'm in a coat and tie now, but I drive the wheat trucks, which happen not to be air conditioned, while everybody else sits in air conditioned, soundproofed cabins, and I'm out there in the sweaty old trucks moving the grain around or fixing fences or whatever. But my son and daughter-in-law belong to a group called Executive Link, where they regularly get together with like-minded, mainly younger, not all, but younger farmers, to talk about what they're doing. That sharing, that cooperation, and that sort of, I suppose you'd say, personal interaction and support is a big part of it. And Landcare tapped into it and accelerated it and took it forward. And I don't want to sound as though it's just purely a farmer benefit. I mean, I remember the June Care group that I touched on very briefly. They were, I don't think they'd mind me saying, largely retired people, and over near Minnewater, which is right by Diggers Rest, and they were so excited about what they were doing.
Yeah.
They so enjoyed their get-togethers, and they so enjoyed getting out there with a bit of physical activity. They so enjoyed seeing the difference that their labours were producing.
Yeah, I think morning tea plays a big part in any solutions. That's what brings people together and provides that therapy. Now you touched earlier on about food waste, and of course that is a massive thing when you talked about the fact that we're producing so much food, but the food produced and the people in need and the waste, it does not match. And in your recent Chaikin oration on the food crisis, you noted that the agricultural science will require more support in future to overcome these impacts that you touched on of climate variability, water scarcity, for example. How can Landcare be a part of that science push towards long-term sufficiency and better farming?
I think there's a bundle of issues in there, if I can say it. One of them, I know a lot of people now, young people especially, say, well, maybe we shouldn't be eating red meat. As a red meat producer, I'd have to say, well, I think we can produce red meat quite sustainably, just sensibly. You know, I'm not saying we don't need to change, but I don't think we need to give up eating red meat. But we do. Every one of us in this country needs to think about how much food we do eat for every reason. And I'm sure all of us have been to functions. I went to one in Victoria. They served an incredibly nice lunch, but I reckon there were 300 people there. I reckon there was enough food for 600. At least half of what was put out on the tables I saw being carted off in big plastic bags to go to the rubbish tip afterwards. And I nearly wept. I thought, that is terrible. And there's every reason to try and reduce that wastage. There's every reason to try and preserve the liberal democratic global order that actually has lifted so many people out of poverty, because political stability, distribution systems, market systems and so forth that work are critical to feeding those people who are not being properly fed. We know there's enough food. But the only answer I can give is I'm optimistic that we'll be able to continue to feed people. Especially in the context where 92 countries in the world now have a declining population. But I think the challenges that you alluded to of seasonal volatility, lack of reliability, it's just about driven us nuts here. We had a good year in 2016. We had 3 years of shocking drought in one of the safest areas of Australia. The management headaches and the demoralisation, I have to say. And for some of us, watching some of the country being degraded and progress being unwound is very painful. And I think the only answer I can give is to say that you need to continue the research and development effort, if not increase it. Our scientists are brilliant in this country. Our research and development corporations are fantastic at getting the word out. And we need to keep people in a good mental state so that they can take up that technology and make it work.
There's so much going on in terms of biodiversity, and some of the panels that are going to be touching on this are really going to be enlightening for anyone watching for the rest of the 2 days. They're from the things that you've been mentioning in terms of fire management, Indigenous land management. That panel covers a massive range of topics which will lift people's ideas that it's not just the fire. It is the understanding of the landscape across the seasons, as you mentioned, and that farming and management of the land is what is essentially every person here watching is a part of that. They're managing their part of the landscape, yet we're building corridors, we're building connections, and we're building an understanding and an exchange. And I suppose you said it, that cooperation based on sound research and data to move forward and support each other with historical knowledge, current knowledge, and then projection. They're exciting times.
Well, I think they are. Now, we always need strong leadership from government. And Bob Hawke provided it. I'd like to think we provided it when we were in government. I'm very admiring of what David Littleproud is seeking to do. And I know Andrew Metcalf's with you. I know he's got good people working very hard in this area. That leadership's important. But the great plus you've got with land managers is that overwhelmingly they want to be engaged and they want to cooperate. They don't see themselves as competitors, to go back to that point. So you can, if you like, it's fueling a fire that's there rather than trying to create a fire, I think was the way I'd put it.
Yeah, exactly. There's more questions. We could go on all morning, but we're sort of getting close to our morning tea break. So any final comment, John, that you'd like to make to all of the delegates here today and to all of the Landcare groups around the country?
Well, only to wish them all the very, very best, and to some of them will be operating in areas where many people in their community in these challenged times are feeling discouraged, which is why what I said about climate change was not to say it's not important. It's to say, though, that to despair, to give way to anxiety, to miss the signs in people in your community who are giving up on it all or wanting to walk away from it, we've got to keep our spirits up. We really do. We've got to see challenges as challenges to be overcome rather than to be overcome by. Hope springs eternal, the old saying has it. Well, you've got to keep that hope alive. Once you give up hope, everything disappears. Well, we are unbelievably fortunate to live in this country. We can talk ourselves down. In reality, we ought to talk ourselves up, not to diminish the problems, not to be negative or naysayers about them, but to say the evidence is clear, we can make great progress, we can overcome great challenges, we've been able to put things right when we've had it wrong. You can see that in farming practices in the past. And so, we've got to set ourselves the objective of doing better, not of despairing.
Well, John, thank you for your time. Thank you for everything that you've shared with us today. I know that there's plenty more questions popping up on the feed, but at this point we're going to head into our morning tea break. So have a great rest of the conference, John. If you can pop in and see some of the different plenaries, it would be great to see you in there at different points. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, everyone. Well, that's it for our first session, and we're going to have a short 15-minute break. So it gives you a chance to have a comfort stop, put the kettle on, grab a cuppa. I've got another couple of details to put into my arrangement here that you will be tested on at the end of tomorrow. Looking at the feed, we've got people coming in from Gundungurra country up at the Blue Mountains. Amy was spot on what you said there, Amy, about the food waste, which John addressed. Paula is here from the Murray Landcare. We've got Peter Piggott from Ewan country down on the south coast. We've got Harden Murrumburra Landcare Group, the Kuroi Landcare Group on Gubbi Gubbi country. Paraparup, Andrea out at Warrawarring country, and Trevor up in Cape York. So to all of you, thank you for joining us. We've only just begun. That's the end of our first session. So take 15 minutes now. It's just on 10:30. Have yourself a little bit of a break, and we'll be back real soon to continue with our next session. So I will see you in 15. Bye for now.